Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're going to be ranking all of the existing Final Girl content. This is everything from Series 1 to Series 2, and we'll also talk about the vignettes and the box of props, small things that make up the entire Final Girl experience. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's talk about Final Girl and my ultimate recommendations for you. So if you're unfamiliar, Final Girl is a solo game where you're going to be playing as the titular Final Girl. You'll use a card system in order to play cards, generate time, and for most of your cards, you'll be rolling these threat dice, and then these dice will generate you successes, which lets you take actions. You'll be moving on the board, attacking your enemies, and hopefully trying to rescue as many of these victims as possible, as well as defeat whatever terrible creature is out there. You'll have a creature as well as a map that you'll mix together, so that each of the boxes that you buy is going to come with one of those. Usually the vignettes just have an enemy, and then you'll have these different locations that will interact differently with each boss, making a unique experience paired with your Final Girl, which will have some special ability that you'll get to trigger like your ultimate mode whenever you save enough victims. So there's reasons to do a little bit of everything, but that ultimate goal is to defeat that enemy. And what makes this game super special is each box has its own flair and personality. So for example, you have the Happy Trails camp here, which has a very classic setting where you're at a summer camp, and so of course the enemy is going to be in that genre. So all of horror is represented here, and with Series 2, you have even more horror with new settings, things like outer space as well as out in the cold, and we'll see how they all stack up here. Before we get into the rankings, I want to quickly mention that there is an entire review for Final Girl on the channel, so I'll leave a link in the description below so you can go check that out. But overall, my ranking for Final Girl has gone up with the release of the Series 2 content. Not only do the new boxes offer a huge improvement and an overall exploration of the game space, but there are also some just quality of life upgrades, one of my favorites being the box of props, which is going to give you these signature action cards, which give you new variety and unique actions for each experience. I love this. It's a small deck that you shuffle, you pick one, and it changes up the action cards that you can pick from. This is something that I thought the game desperately needed, was more variance with the action cards from game to game, and as though this is a very small thing, it's going to be something that you're going to appreciate and enjoy exploring as you grab that card and are actually using it, and it's going to be something that you try to use often. So that's a strong recommendation from me for the box of props, and overall how impressed I am with the Series 2 content. So that's all of the preface here. Let's get into the list with number 12. At the bottom of the list, we have Terror from Above. Now this is a vignette expansion, so it's just a small little box that's going to have one single enemy scenario in it. No map or anything like that. It also comes with a Final Girl that you can use in all of your different games. Now this one is going to have a unique challenge for you where you're having these birds that are going to start swarming the different areas, and if they're ever three to an area, they start moving on to the other locations. If the entire board gets covered in birds, you automatically lose. So it's a race against time as you're trying to find these special victims and get them out before the entire board gets covered. Now my favorite part about this one is actually the Final Girl that comes with it. It doesn't have an item or anything like that, but it has an awesome ability where they can take damage to deal immediate hits, so it is useful for killing minions, which you can use in other scenarios we'll talk about later with multiple enemies. But I think that the scenario overall isn't really something I'm excited to play with for Final Girl, particularly because there's a gigantic emphasis on movement, and that's basically the biggest thing here. You're going to be using your weak attacks in order to deal a couple of ping damages, or if you do use Melanie, you can upgrade her to deal some damage and clear some things, but overall, you're just trying to get sprint cards, trying to rescue as many people as possible, because you need to flip yourself to unlock that win condition of being able to spawn the special victims, so it's just getting the sprint cards and moving pretty fast. Not one that I'm really excited to play. That's number 12, that's Terror from Above. Next up is number 11, and this is The Haunting of Creech Manor, where you're playing at Creech Manor and against the Poltergeist. Now, my favorite part about this one is actually the Creech Manor portion. It's going to put you in this large house, which has some one-way escape mechanisms, and all of the exits are in one area, so it makes sense as this manor. You're exploring the house. I think that's a lot of fun, but I think this one is also on the bottom, similar to what I said about Terror from Above, where it focuses on one mechanism with the Poltergeist, where you're going to be searching for the majority of the game. Instead of having hit points, the Poltergeist has an item you're trying to find, and so you must escape with that item. Not something that I'm particularly interested in playing a lot of, but I do like Creech Manor because that's going to be fun with any of the other killers, particularly some more that we'll see as we go down further on the list. So that's number 11. That is Poltergeist, overall The Haunting of Creech Manor. Number 10 goes to Once Upon a Full Moon. This has you playing against the Big Bad Wolf in the Storybook Woods. It's our first Series 2 box, and it's going to have a lot of fantasy themes put into it, and that's got to be my favorite part. You've got Red and Gretel, who are going to be your final girls, but you also meet all sorts of fantasy characters along the way, and items, things like the Pied Piper. They'll show up in the events, which make it a lot of fun to play. In addition, I think that the killer is pretty dang cool as it has this hunting mode. It's going to be moving around the map and stalking you until it eventually turns into its full-on assault mode. It's going to be dealing big damage. A lot of fun there trying to figure out the time in between those. I think that the location board is a little bit restrictive as there are these bridges, so it's harder to move the victims around the map, so it's harder to get to your ultimate, but overall I do think this one is a lot of fun, and it's a great introductory box. So that is number 10, Once Upon a Full Moon. My number 9 goes to the Happy Trails Horror. This has you playing against Hans the Butcher at Camp Happy Trails. I think that this one does a good job of introducing you to the game, as it's probably going to be the one that you play with first with your Final Girl core box, as it did come with that Series 1, and it's often bundled together with it. Now when you play this, you're going to be playing with no additional rules overhead, so it does make a great learning experience as you're just getting that core system down, but I don't know how often I'm going to return to it because it is pretty dang simple. It doesn't have a big amount of complexity, which means your options are limited to that core Final Girl system. Now that's not a bad thing. I still think it's a lot of fun, and I think the Camp Happy Trails is a fun setting to be in, as it's that classic horror setting of being out in the wilderness against some terrible butcher, and Hans is pretty dang scary as he's just this hulking mass that doesn't move on his own, but his terror cards are going to be pushing him into the different locations. So still a lot of fun. That is Camp Happy Trails here, and Hans the Butcher at the Happy Trails Horror, my number 9. My number 8 goes to Into the Void. This is the USCSS Patna with the Evil Morph. Now this is essentially Aliens, the board game, put into the Final Girl framework. I think it does a pretty dang good job at replicating it. My favorite part is the map of the game, as you're going to be on the ship, and you'll be moving to the different locations using key cards to interact and activate different portions and segments and machinery, which is great because you can decide how much you want to interact with that, and there are some portions you can just ignore, and then the next time you play, you can engage with those instead. It means that you can go to the search areas and look at things there. It's pretty dang fun, and I think it's one that you'll really enjoy. The reason it's a little bit lower has to do with the Evil Morph itself, as the character, it has this evolution system, and I feel that the first portion of the evolution system just isn't super interesting, as it almost always evolves right away. Well, the way it works is it has 3 stages, and if it kills something in its first stage, it moves to its middle, and then if it kills enough in its middle, it goes to its big one. But that first stage, it moves and then attacks for like 10 damage, so it's pretty much guaranteed to kill something and move and get into position right away. So there's not much interaction and interplay, so I think they should just start it in that middle portion. I don't think there's any reason for it to be in that original one, because you have to be like set up perfectly with the setup card so that you can actually interact with it and get it out of the way. So not something that I found super interesting there. So I do wish that the Evil Morph is a little bit more refined, but it does still retain those thematics, and I think the ship is awesome. So that's my number 8, that is Into the Void. My number 7 goes to Carnage at the Carnival. This has you playing against Geppetto, the Puppet Master, at the Carnival of Blood. And my favorite part is Geppetto. The way he works is he controls these minions, like marionettes, on strings, and he's going to be sending them out to attack you. And I love that they are restricted in their movement because they can only move so far away from Geppetto. Now, you still have to kill Geppetto to win the game, so you have to decide how you're going to interact and engage and fight off those minions. Do you move away from them just so that you're out of reach? Do you make it so that you're going for Geppetto and just going for that early kill? There's a bunch of interaction points with Geppetto, and I think that is awesome. He's definitely the highlight of this box. The reason that Carnage at the Carnival is rounding out the bottom of the list here, though, is the Carnival of Blood portion, the location, and that has to do with the traps that are included. There's some event cards that will just be sort of gotchas. You'll reveal them and then just kill people and put these tokens on the board that you just stay away from. Not super interactive or interesting, and it just sort of happens. But the thing that really kills me is in the item decks, you'll be shuffling these trap cards into them, and when you reveal them from the item deck, a terrible thing happens to you. So it sort of deters you from going down that strategy of actually going through the item decks, and means that you're just going to be skimming from the cards off the top most of the time, because honestly, it's not really worth it to dig down there and suffer this terrible travesty from revealing one of these trap cards. So I don't really like the limitations there from that trap deck, but I do think that thematically it is pretty dang cool. But Geppetto is definitely the reason to grab this box. So that is Carnage at the Carnival, my number 7. My number 6 goes to Frightmare on Maple Lane. This has you playing against Dr. Fright at Maple Lane, as you're going to be going into the dream world to take him down. And my favorite part about this is that interaction with the rest mechanism, as it's going to have you exploring and using cards you may not normally be using in new, interesting ways. As you're jumping into the worlds, some of the event cards might switch you back and forth between the waking and the dream world, as you have some counterplay and interplay between the different terror cards, as well as what you're trying to do currently on the board in interaction with like the events and just trying to take down the killer, because you can only defeat him when you're actually in that dream world. I love that phenomenon here, and I think it does it really well. Another thing I enjoy is Maple Lane itself. I think this entire box is awesome, as it gives you a neighborhood that you get to explore. There's more item decks, more quadrants of the board that some of the effects might activate with when it comes to the event cards and the terror cards. And I also think that it's super fun and honestly thematic that the houses are closed. You actually have to knock on the doors in order to get inside of them, and then you have to hopefully make some good relationship with these people that you're breaking into their house to trying to get something from. So I love that there are cards that actually have you interacting with the neighbors here. It's not just roaming into the different areas. So I think that's pretty thematic and a lot of fun. So that is Dr. Fright and Maple Lane, my number 6. My number 5 goes to Slaughter in the Groves. This is my favorite from the Series 1 boxes, has you playing against Incanyamba at the Sacred Groves. Now when you play this one, it's going to be including this extra tarot card with an additional track on it that'll move up based on the actions that you take as well as the tarot cards. Now you can control these as well with action cards that you can purchase, but ultimately they're this extra threat thing that you got to worry about that are going to make the game a nightmare for you. And that's one of the things I love so much about it, is it's a pretty dang challenging experience, as Incanyamba is pretty fast, pretty strong, and he hits hard once he gets his bloodlust going, and that's terrifying. Now much like Incanyamba, the Sacred Groves is also going to get more difficult the more that track goes up, and if you put them together, it makes for the hardest experience in my opinion for Final Girl. And if you're going to play this, I recommend that you mix and match with some of the other sets first before you play them together, because it is a super hard experience, and I think that's what I like so much about it. It's an extra thing that you're dealing with and interacting with, and the pressure of the scenario and the speed of it means that you're going to have to make some tough decisions, and you're going to be focusing on taking actions in the now as opposed to getting your focus up and just getting your horror down as much as possible to get more dice. So I like that it's getting you into the action more, and your first couple of turns aren't going to be just trying to get your terror level down as much as possible. So I enjoy that a lot with this, that pressure and the entire scenario as a whole. That is Incanyamba and the Sacred Groves, my favorite one from Series 1, Slaughter in the Groves, my number 5. My number 4 goes to Terror at Station 2891, where you're going to be fighting against the Organism. This is the thing put into the Final Girl system, much like what we saw with Alien and Into the Void, but it's done so perfectly here on both sides. I don't really have a favorite portion here because I think they're both done splendidly. Now the killer itself has 3 potential exposed victims, and you're going to make sure that you test them all before that terror deck runs out. So you'd be going to those different search locations, and you just get to take one of the testing kits for free when you do a successful search. So it encourages you to move around, but not necessarily stay at one location and just keep on spamming search. So I love that. It's getting you to move around, explore, and find these small mini objectives as you play. Once you test them, they could potentially immediately turn into one of these terrible organisms, so you might have to kill it on the spot here or run away from it, which is terrifying because it could just happen. But if you take too long and your terror deck runs out, you immediately have to turn all remaining exposed victims into organisms. So you actually must be on it, get going, start testing people, and it puts pressure on you to do these things fast and deal with the consequences. Love that about the enemy. And on top of that, the Station 2891 map is set in the Arctic. So you're going to have this helicopter that comes in and rescues the different characters, but to compensate for the slower track of actually rescuing people, you'll have this walkie-talkie so you can manipulate the different characters on the board. It's got this freezing mechanism with the exposed outside areas and the inside tracks. It is perfect. Terror at Station 2891 is amazing, but it just missed the top of the list at number 4. Now, I did say it just missed the top of the list. That's because I think that these 3, 2, and 1 could be pretty much in any order. They're the best Final Girl content out there, all from Series 2, and I think you could play any of them and have an amazing time, but they are ranked in the order that I have the most fun playing them. And the first one is number 3. This is Madness in the Dark. This is the Ratchet Lady at Wolf Asylum. So you're at an insane asylum here, and your villain is going to be Ratchet Lady, who is recruiting all sorts of these maniac followers. And so they are victims turned evil, so you do have ways through action cards that you can try to convince them to come back onto your side and then rescue them like normal. I love that interaction, that interplay, and the way that you can strengthen yourself and weaken at the same time, but you have that risk involved because, of course, you got to make a skill check for it. I love that. My favorite part about this box, though, is the location itself. I love the Wolf Asylum. Whenever you set up a game for it, you're going to be scattering these pill tokens all over the board, and you start with some are shuffled into the item decks, so you have all these ways to gain pills, and when you decide to use them, you're going to get some special ability and power, but then you'll draw side effect cards. It's a push your luck system where you're drawing these cards that can do terrible things, or you could have no side effects at all and just get away with some special effect. You also have ways to gain special amped cards, which give you new unique powers that you get to keep for the whole game. You can combine them to get different bonuses and effects based on the color of pills you're taking. There's a lot of choice here, and it's up to you on how much you engage with it. I love it so much. That's a pill system, and that's what makes the Madness in the Dark my number 3. My number 2 goes to A Knock at the Door. These are the intruders at Wingard Cottage. Now, the enemies, the killers, are the intruders, a set of 3 different killers that are going to be alternating between themselves. They encourage you to make plays against against them one at a time, doing chip damage every so often, and playing that long game, which I love. It means you're not just saving up all your damage to the very end, and you're able to actually make meaningful progress as you play during your experience. I love that alternation system and how the terror cards really lean into it. Excellent system with the killers. But the kicker here is the location, the Winged Cottage, and that has to do with the item cards and the special crafted and supply item cards. As you move around the map, there are going to be different locations that you can go to and spend some time to just pick up materials. And there'll be a list of crafted items on the side of the board that you can spend those materials to make. You're basically home aloneing them. You're going to be making traps, setting them up, and taking them out one at a time, setting them up for failure. I love that so much because you get to put in this effort in order to make these traps, set them, and it feels like you're defending your own home and location, and I think the theme brings out super strong in this one. I love the crafting system and how much it makes sense, but also how you're able to create things just out of these materials, upgrade the other items that you found as you're exploring, but then that interaction with the triple killers and the way you're dealing that damage one at a time to them. It's a perfect pairing, and I think that this location is just a lot of fun in general, but paired with the intruders, I think it makes it sing. So that is Knock at the Door, and that is my number 2. And my number 1 goes to Terror from the Grave, the second Vignette expansion and the best expansion for Final Girl. This is zombies put into the Final Girl universe, and it does it the best in any board game that I've played, where you're fearing for your life because you have this constant spawn of zombies coming, and your goal to win is defeat all the zombies. You have to do that to actually obtain victory. And you're terrified the whole time because if one of your civilians, one of the people that you're trying to save, gets killed by a zombie, they become a zombie. They just make the horde bigger, make it harder. It's terrifying to play through this one. Terror from the Grave is a Vignette expansion, so you're going to need another box to play with it because of the location required, as it is just the enemy, but that's a huge positive for this one because of the vehicle system. When you play Terror from the Grave, there are going to be these location tokens that you'll shuffle up that represent the vehicles, so you're going to ignore them if they show up on an item or something, but whenever you interact with that vehicle, you're going to get new action cards that are for that vehicle specifically that'll help you take down that horde of terrible zombies. I love this so much because it gives you another little objective that you're going to be going towards, trying to find that vehicle, and gives you unique action cards which change up that game experience. Love this so much. Terror from the Grave is the best Final Girl expansion, and I think it's my favorite zombie thing in board games at all. That's my number 1, that is Terror from the Grave. So that's it. That's the list. Those are all of the feature film boxes as well as the Vignette expansions ranked for Final Girl Series 1 and Series 2. I'd love to hear what you thought about this list. If you agree with my opinions on my ranking here, what are your favorite feature film box? What do you think of the Vignette expansions? And overall, what do you think of Final Girl? What do you think of Series 2? Love to hear what you think. But thank you so much for watching SideGame Strong.